I still remember the exact moment I realized they had no idea who they were firing. Not just an employee, not just a name on a payroll sheet, but the architect of the very system their company depended on. My name is Claire Donovan. I spent 9 years building Nexora Systems' core infrastructure from the ground up. When Maxwell Granger walked in all charm and expensive suits, he thought he knew better. He thought I was expendable. By Friday, he made it official, firing me with a rehearsed speech about moving at a different pace. By Monday, he learned the truth the hard way, because buried deep in my contract was a little clause no one had bothered to read. A patent, my patent, without it, their operations would crumble, and they did. Spectacularly, have you ever been underestimated by someone too arrogant to realize the damage they caused? If you have, share your story in the comments. And tell me if you were in my shoes. Would you have walked away quietly or made sure they remembered your name? I joined Nexora Systems almost a decade ago. Back then, we were a struggling tech company, barely keeping the lights on. I was young, hungry, and determined to build something that would last longer than the executives who kept coming and going. I poured everything into it late nights, endless problem-solving systems built from scratch. Over time, I became Director of Systems Architecture. Not just a title on a business card, but the person everyone quietly relied on when the servers glitched or the client portals lagged. When a near-acquisition disaster almost sank us 6 years ago, I designed a new back-end infrastructure, streamlined, secure, scalable. It saved the company. And under the advice of the CEO at the time, I patented the architecture under my own name, tucked carefully into my employment contract. Most people never read the fine print, especially people like Maxwell Granger. When Max arrived, he brought big promises and little understanding. Tailored black suits, polished speeches, and a grin that never touched his eyes. He strutted through the main office like he had just inherited a kingdom without realizing he had no idea how it functioned. "Call me Max," he said at his first meeting. "I like things lean, fast, and efficient." The room fell into forced clapping. I stayed silent because real change isn't about slogans. It is about understanding what keeps the foundation from cracking. Within a week, chaos took root. He canceled vital project reviews, fired managers who knew the systems inside out sometimes, by email, sometimes with a smile. He renamed my role from Director of Systems Architecture to Tech Lead, as if titles were just flair for his vision board. He interrupted me during meetings, praised junior staff for ideas I had already presented, and made it clear. In his mind, I was part of the old furniture, expendable, replaceable. He had no clue what I owned. No clue that the thing he thought was just another internal tool was my intellectual property ticking like a clock toward a deadline he couldn't see. And as Friday afternoon loomed, he made his final fatal mistake. The morning he fired me, it almost felt scripted. Max strolled into my office, leaned against the doorframe like he was posing for a company brochure, and said, "Claire, can we talk?" He did not even sit down. He just stood there delivering a speech he had probably rehearsed in front of a mirror. Words like evolving culture and fresh perspectives poured out of him. Then came the blow. "We're letting you go, effective immediately. No warning, no review, no conversation. Just a severance package and a handshake." He never even bothered to extend. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I smiled, a calm, deliberate smile he mistook for defeat. Because in that moment, I realized something he did not. Without my consent, Nexora could not legally use the architecture powering 82% of their operations. The very foundation of their scheduling systems, client portals, APIs, internal reporting, all of it was tied to my patent. And the licensing agreement, it was set to expire Sunday at midnight, meaning by Monday morning unless they renegotiated with me directly. Nexora Systems would lose the legal right to use their own infrastructure. He had no idea. No one in leadership did. They thought they were cutting dead weight. In reality, they had just amputated the beating heart of their entire operation. As Max turned and left my office, throwing one last smug comment over his shoulder, "I'm not about to spend a dime on someone who peaked 5 years ago." I calmly packed my things, a plant I had somehow kept alive for 5 years, a few photos from old team retreats, and a single USB drive holding only memories. Nothing strategic. I did not need anything else. The real leverage was already mine, written in legal ink buried deep in contracts. Max never bothered to read. Walking through the open office one last time, I felt the weight of silent stares. Some sympathetic, some nervous, most avoiding eye contact. That is how fear spreads in corporate halls. Quietly, in the glances, no one wants to meet. When I reached my car, my hands shook. Not from sadness, but from adrenaline. Not anger, not regret, just clarity. They thought they had ended my chapter, but I knew the truth. By Monday morning, they would realize what real loss looks like, and they would have no one to blame but themselves. That weekend felt like standing inside the eye of a hurricane. Everything was unnaturally still. But I could feel the pressure building. I did not tell anyone I had been fired. Not my sister, who would have immediately started planning a counterattack. Not my best friend, who would have shown up with wine and a rallying speech. And certainly not my ex-husband, who once said I was married to my work. I needed silence, not pity, not outrage, space, perspective. On Friday night, I wandered the city streets, letting the cold cut through the numbness. It was not the loss of the job that stung. It was the insult, the dismissal of years of work by someone who had never written a line of code. Someone who thought power came from titles, not from understanding. By Saturday morning, that sadness hardened into focus. I pulled out my personal contract. Read every line carefully, like a battle plan. There it was clear and indisputable. The architecture I built was patented under my name. The company had licensing rights, but only with my ongoing explicit consent. And that licensing agreement expired. Sunday night, I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because the timing was poetic. At 3 p.m., I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my personal email, and composed a message to Nexora's legal team. The subject line was simple. Notice of intellectual property usage expiration. Immediate attention required. No drama. No accusations, just facts. I attached a copy of the patent registration, highlighted the licensing clause, outlined the expiration date, and reminded them that continued use beyond Sunday without a renegotiated agreement would constitute a breach of intellectual property law. I CC'd the company's general counsel, the former CTO, HR, and yes, Max. Then I hit send. Calm, precise, unshakable. Afterward, I went for a run. 4 miles through foggy streets, weaving between tourists and street vendors, letting the cold air burn away the last scraps of doubt. By Sunday afternoon, the calls started, unknown numbers, voicemails from HR, panic emails from legal. Even a late-night message from Max himself dripping with forced friendliness. Emma, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I would like to resolve this situation before business resumes Monday. Please call me. I didn't respond. Not yet, because Monday morning would be their real education. When the servers stalled, when client dashboards failed, when the systems they took for granted blinked out one by one, they thought they fired me. But all they had really done was set the clock ticking toward their own downfall. And I was more than ready to let the countdown hit 0. Monday morning arrived like a slow explosion. I was already awake before dawn. Coffee brewed, phone fully charged, laptop open waiting. At exactly 8:07 a.m., the first email came through, subject system error, back-end authentication failed. Then another, urgent clients, unable to access dashboard, and another, high priority, internal reporting. Down the messages stacked up, each more frantic than the last. The entire company's infrastructure was collapsing in real time. By 8:31 a.m., my phone lit up. It was Max. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice cool and even. Claire. He blurted, trying to sound calm, but failing miserably. We need to talk. I'm happy to talk, I said, but not about a job. Silence. We're discussing licensing now, I added smoothly, as an external partner. The weight of that sentence seemed to finally hit him. I ended the call before he could argue. At 9:12 a.m., I walked through the front doors of Nexora Systems, not the side employee entrance, the main lobby, head-high steps, measured heels clicking against polished marble. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. Ms. Donovan, she said, voice tight. They're waiting for you upstairs. I took the elevator alone, watching my reflection sharpen in the mirrored walls. Focused, unshaken. Ready on the 7th floor, the legal team was already assembled. No Max in sight. The general counsel stood as I entered. His tie was loose, His face strained. "Claire, we appreciate you coming in," he said carefully. "We'd like to resolve this amicably." "I'm all for clean resolutions," I said, sliding into the chair at the far end of the table. The terms were simple: a 1-year licensing agreement, full operational access to the patented system, non-exclusive renewable quarterly direct technical support through me or a consulting team I personally approved. Total $1 to $2 million for the year, plus public acknowledgement of my patent in all company technical documentation. No watered-down language, no collaborative project spin. Clear, specific, undeniable. The room shifted. Whispers, notes, scribbled hastily. One junior legal associate cleared her throat. "That's a significant increase." "It's reflective of value," I said evenly. "Something this company forgot how to measure." The general counsel leaned back, studying me. "We'll need to escalate this to the board." "I'll wait," I said simply. "And just so you know," I added, standing slowly, "every hour you delay damages client trust, damages your stock, damages your future." Their faces tightened. They knew I was right. Outside the glass-walled conference room, I caught sight of Max pacing on his phone. Frantic. When he finally spotted me, he froze, then crossed the hallway, forcing a tight smile. "Claire," he said, trying to reclaim his old confidence, "this has gone too far. We should have talked before legal got involved." "You mean before you fired me?" I said. Raising an eyebrow, he shoved his hands into his pockets. Tried for casual. It was an incomplete picture. "No," I corrected, "it was arrogance." Max opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to negotiate. And if you want to salvage anything, your job, your reputation, you'll let legal do their work." I walked past him without looking back, but just before stepping into the conference room, I turned slightly. "And Max," I said, voice calm but cutting, "good luck." He needed it, because luck was all he had left. I sat alone in the waiting area, watching the hands on the clock drag toward 10. Inside the conference room, the legal team huddled, drafting frantic messages to the board. Every minute that ticked by without a signed agreement, Nexora hemorrhaged trust, clients, and credibility. At 10:03 a.m., the general counsel called me back in. He looked smaller somehow, less polished, more desperate. "We've reviewed your proposal." He began, careful, measured, and I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "We're prepared to accept the licensing rate, but we would prefer to phrase the patent acknowledgement as a technical collaboration." I leaned forward, voice steady, no silence. "You don't get to bury my work in sanitized language." I continued. "I built the system, I patented it, I protected this company. And if you want to move forward, you will state it clearly. System designed and patented by Claire Donovan." The room stiffened. One legal associate scribbled something on her notepad. The advisor at the end of the table adjusted his tie, but said nothing. Finally, the general counsel nodded once, tight and reluctant. "We'll take that to the board." I stood, gathering my folder calmly. "And while you do," I added, "you might want to think about how the SEC views unreported licensing conflicts tied to operational collapse." That landed like a hammer. No one spoke as I walked out. In the hallway, I spotted Nicole, an old colleague still clinging to Nexora's chaos. She leaned against the wall, wide-eyed. "They're calling you the firewall upstairs," she whispered. Half in awe, I smiled faintly. "Better than being called redundant," I said. Nicole laughed, but her eyes were serious. "Max is spinning like crazy, telling anyone who will listen that you never disclosed the licensing issue." I shook my head. "Calm, let him talk. Truth doesn't need volume." By lunchtime, the first cracks appeared. Whispers from the intern pool, rumors swirling through Slack channels, screenshots of my email time-stamped legally clear circulating quietly among staff. I didn't have to shout. The paper trail spoke for itself. But I was not finished yet, because reclaiming my value was only the beginning. Holding leadership accountable, that was the real endgame. That evening, I sent one final email, not to Max, not to legal, but directly to the board chair. I had saved his email address from years ago, back when we collaborated on a small innovation initiative no one remembered but me. The subject line was short: re-system licensing, public statement, and leadership conduct inside. I laid it out: the operational scope of my patented system, the timeline of the licensing agreement, Max's failure to review critical IP obligations, His attempt to spin the story post-crisis, I ended with a single question. If this is how your CEO handles internal assets, how can you trust him with external partnerships, vendors, or investors? Less than 12 hours later, I had my answer. Not from Max, not from HR, but directly from the board liaison. A short, crisp message. Claire, thank you for your clarity and professionalism. We are reviewing this matter internally. In the meantime, we fully support the licensing terms you proposed. Respect, recognition, and control. All the things Max had tried to strip away now firmly back in my hands. The next morning, I walked into Nexora's top-floor boardroom for the second time in my life. But this time, I did not come as an employee. I came as leverage. The room was stark cold, the same heavy oak table, the same glass walls overlooking the city. But the energy was different. Max sat at the far end, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was no longer the untouchable CEO. He was a man scrambling to contain fallout he never saw coming. The board chair thanked me for attending, then asked, Claire, before we deliberate further, we would like your perspective. I stood calmly. No notes this time, no nerves. Leadership is not about flexing authority, I said. It is about understanding the systems, technical and human, that keep you afloat. When new leadership arrives, they have two choices, listen or bulldoze. Max chose the latter. I let that sink in. He dismissed critical knowledge, fired without understanding the risks, ignored legal obligations, and only started listening when it was already too late. Silence settled over the room. One board member leaned forward and asked, if you were in his position, Claire, what would you have done differently? I smiled slightly. I wouldn't have been in his position because real leadership starts beside the people who build the system, not above them. It values collaboration over control, and it never ever waits for failure before asking questions. A few board members exchanged quiet looks. I knew then that the decision had already been made. I left the room as they deliberated, waited in the corridor, watching the city skyline blur through the tall windows. At 11:47 a.m., the board chair called me back and Max was gone. The chair sat down heavily and folded his hands. Claire, he said, we have concluded our review. Effective immediately, Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave, pending further investigation. He handed me a draft of the internal announcement. It read, we formally acknowledge Claire Donovan's leadership, innovation, and patented contribution as vital to Nexora Systems' infrastructure and recovery. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because so many people, especially women in tech, never get it. I took a steady breath. As for next steps, the chair continued, we would like to retain you as a short-term consultant, 90 days. To stabilize operations, mentor the next lead architect, and implement the protections you proposed. My terms, my pace, my rules. I agreed because it was never about going back. It was about building something better. That afternoon as I left the building, the silence that once filled the hallways had shifted. Now there were cautious smiles, soft congratulations, nods from people who weeks ago would not meet my eye. I wasn't returning as their coworker. I was returning as a force they could no longer erase. In the weeks that followed, change began to take root. Slowly, almost invisibly at first. Exit interviews were revamped to flag leadership malpractice. New clauses mandated IP contract reviews during executive transitions. Whistleblower protections were tied directly to board oversight. Engineering milestones now included mandatory credit attribution. Nexora would never be perfect. No company is, but it was no longer a place where silence ruled over truth. And as for Max, his leave became permanent. The official language was diplomatic, irreconcilable leadership differences. But everyone knew the real story. I never corrected the whispers. I did not need to. The code still bore my fingerprints. The system still stood on the architecture I built. And this time, so did my name. Sometimes the system you need to fix is not the code. It is the culture. Real leadership does not silence the builders. It amplifies them, and real strength. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It is quiet, steady, unshakable. You do not have to shout to make an impact. You just have to know your worth and never let anyone take it from you. What started as a cold, silent walk out of a job turned into something much bigger than me. It became a reminder that real value does not come from titles or office sizes or polished speeches. It comes from the work we build, the systems we protect, the integrity we refuse to abandon even when others do. I did not burn bridges. I built my own stronger, wider, and only open to those who respect what it took to lay every single brick. To anyone out there who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or labeled difficult for simply knowing your worth, let me tell you this: you are not too much. You are not too intense. You are not asking for too much when you demand respect. You are asking for what you have already earned, and if they cannot see it, you do not shrink, you do not beg. You build your own table and you set your own place at it. Because when they fire you thinking they've silenced you, all they have really done is give you the space to rise without them. What about you? Have you ever had to fight to protect your worth? Drop a talk, never settle, in the comments. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you believe respect should be earned, not demanded, make sure you subscribe for more true stories like this one, stories that prove real strength is quiet but unstoppable.